Thanks for joining. I see a lot of familiar faces. I see a lot of new faces. Perfect. Everybody say hello to Michael Bierut. He is, I'm sure you can see him there. If you want to unplug or unmute and give him a round of applause for joining us today.
Yeah.
There it is. The Zoom clap.
Thank you.
Awesome. So we are about to start. Thank you guys all for making the time today. We have a lot of faculty on board. We have a lot of alumni. We have friends and family on board here as well, which is really, really cool. The whole point of this was Michael reached out and saw that on Twitter, he was telling us that he had recently done a few Zoom things with in-class meetings last week. And we wanted to take full advantage of that. And so reached out to him on Twitter, and with the help of a few students, he joined us in and sent us an email immediately. So first of all, thank you again, man, for doing that. We really appreciate that.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's great to be there with you all virtually.
Excellent, excellent. And he needs no introduction, but I'll give you just the brief kind of thing here. We were so excited to, one, get you to join in, talk a little bit about design. We can geek out about this a lot today. I hope it's a good kind of release for everybody as well. But got a few questions I want to just start off with. First of all, looking for your help and kind of advice as we kind of navigate through here. How many of you, just by raise of hand that I can see, are graduating seniors at this point or ready to graduate? Perfect, perfect. So that's the whole point, Michael. We'd love to kind of talk a little bit about how these students can take advantage of this situation, turn it around to a really good positive, and hopefully gain some insight from you and everything you've learned over the years. So you ready to go? All right, perfect. First of all, I think we just wanted, we'd ask, how are you, your family, your colleagues, everybody doing at this point over the last week or two?
We're doing good. Pentagram, I work in an office that has 100+ people right in the middle of Manhattan. I'd say probably the majority of the staff. Obviously, most of us live in the general metropolitan New York area. I'd say a lot of the designers live in Brooklyn and Queens, which are in the heart of where the virus is really taking a severe toll right now. We closed the office effectively a little bit. We've had 3 full weeks of, so I think the 3 weeks ago today effectively was the first day that we were all started working from home.
Yeah.
And we've been shutting down the week leading up into that. So we've sort of had about a solid month of disruption so far. And I'm happy to say that there have been a few people reported who've reported symptoms, but no current staff has been hospitalized. Everyone is sort of hanging in there. I live up north of the city in a suburb called Tarrytown, which is along the Hudson River. So I'm fortunate. I have not a mansion by a long shot, but a proper house with a front door and a back door, and I can walk out and be on a path along the Hudson River, which is lovely. I'm married to, I've been married for 40 years this year to a woman who is not only an extremely good, enthusiastic cook who tends to stress cook as therapy, but she's also literally a psychotherapist too. And so she's in a way the ideal spouse to have at your disposal, someone who can make good meals and sort of understands how to tend to your emotional well-being and mental well-being, although she points out to me constantly that she is not my therapist, and I need to, if I want a therapist, I should call my own therapist, not try to get free help at home. So I've got 3 kids, all of whom are grown, and one is in Brooklyn, one's up in the New Jersey suburbs, another one's in graduate school out in Colorado. All of them are fine too.
Good. Good.
So far, so good. We've been I will say that in New York, we, in general, have taken this seriously, and in our office took it really seriously. And, we're doing everything we can, both to stay safe and to, kind of not add to the substantial burden that's being faced by healthcare workers and other public officials, first responders, all the people who are really on the front line of this thing. You know? And so, that said, I miss being with people. I'm at the stage, and maybe some of you are now, where you see a television show where people are like shaking hands or like at a party and dancing with each other, or just in a crowd, and you're thinking, are they crazy? Why are they doing that? Then of course it was filmed, you know, more than a month and a half ago. That's how it used to be, right? So
yeah,
it's weird what it does to your head, but it's the only consolation is that this is truly one of those rare things where we are literally all in it together. People with privilege can insulate themselves a little bit better than, you know, and then there are people who have almost no resources to insulate themselves from what's happening.
Yeah.
But the virus doesn't give a shit. It will come and get you if it's your time. And so that's always been true. We're all mortals, but this all brings it home with a vengeance, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Hey, we'll start on that note as opposed to end on that
exactly.
note. So
it only gets uphill from here.
Exactly. Yeah.
and you know, a good segue into my next question was, as you guys have transitioned into this kind of new virtual world, what has surprised you, or what things have you learned are really, really kind of unique in how we've switched to being so virtual?
Nick, that's a good question. Thank you. One thing that surprised me was that how productive. I've been surprised, and I just was talking to one of my clients, and he agreed. It's a little bit remarkable how productive you can be using the sort of online tools that we have today. You know, and Zoom is one of them, and you know, whatever kind of group kind of meeting tools you have, or things like Slack, or, you know, email, text, all stuff like that, things that you know, have, you know, both been taken for granted. And I have to admit, I was one of those people who was never a fan of, you know, of this sort of meeting. If I had an option to actually be in a room with someone, I always much preferred the latter. And I think that there's a kind of focus you get when everyone is sort of in the same space on the same screen. You know, I've got a couple of people on my team particularly who I think can really work through a session in a really fluent way and pull up material, and sort of like we've been able to get some work done really, you know, really quickly. And of course, I think it's also been observed, people who are accustomed to working from home sort of will say that people who go into an office, particularly if they have any sort of commute to get to that office, you know, a lot of times we'll only get 4.5 hours worth of work done in an 8-hour day anyway, because they're spending some of the time getting there, some of the time getting back, some of the time walking around and getting a cup of coffee, or kind of like having small talk, or doing all the stuff you do in between your actual work. And that's true. On the other hand, all those things I described, not the commute necessarily, but the cup of coffee and the small talk, are what makes life worth living to a certain degree, you know, and what makes the work that we do as designers, you know, I find uniquely satisfying. That is not, and for the most part, at least the work I've done has never been an isolated experience. It's never been just me going away somewhere and trying to be creative alone in a room. It's always been the give and take with other people, with, you know, when I was younger, with my boss or superiors, and, you know, then with my peers, and now with my partners, and with my team, and with my clients, and with all the other people I encounter. And I value that. And and to the degree that the ability to kind of get in touch with someone pretty quickly these days is and knowing that no one is sort of, you know, out or doing anything. You know,
you don't have any plans this weekend.
No one's got any plans to do anything. You know, that actually has changed things a little bit too, and is one of the silver linings, I think, that some of the graduating seniors may kind of look for as they sort of look out into this stormy world as it appears today on Friday, the 3rd of April.
I saw someone post something just in the first few days of this whole situation, like, now is the perfect time for any young designer to reach out to someone they admire or they look up to. And we've been seeing that happening, and we've been seeing great success stories with that as well, which is great. One person I reached out to, and I've been talking to a few folks at some of the other colleges, and someone named Sarah Farr, she had this great thing, and she wrote, these students are entering the workforce during a very, very unique time in history. And I figured, is this a way we can flip that story, and instead of make it extra scary, how do we turn it into something super, super productive and something they can thrive in? What do you think is the advice you'd give them as they're navigating through here to take advantage of this situation, and what design can do there?
Well, here's a couple of things that I've been thinking. One, I graduated from design school in June of 1980. What is that? Let's do the math. Is that like
You're talking to a bunch of creatives.
Yeah, it sounds like 40 years ago to me, right?
Everybody quickly opens up their calculator app.
That would be 40 years. 2020 minus 1980, I believe, is 40 years, right?
There you go.
And so a long time has passed since then, but I can remember so clearly what that was like. And thank you, Rebecca and Colby. You got it 40. The prize there. And I remember what it was like to sort of be leaving an experience that for me had been all consuming. I loved studying design. I loved being in school. And I was I was going to move from where I went to school in Cincinnati, Ohio, to New York City. I was fortunate that I had, unusually, because this was not true for most of my peers, but I had already kind of managed to line up a job by means I can tell you in a moment. But still, it was like it was a leap into the unknown, and it always is. It is in good times, it is in bad times, and it's exciting, and it's an adventure. And I think that one of the things that makes it most exciting is the fact that you're able to take the framework that you've developed over the last few years at some place, like California, like CSUN, or wherever you are. And do you call it CSUN? Or do you call it CSUN?
We call it CSUN. Yeah.
CSUN. It's somewhere like CSUN or wherever you are.
It sounds it sounds so much more optimistic in Southern California.
Yeah, it does. And I'm sure believe me, I'm positive it's more optimistic than Cincinnati would have been. But I think you sort of have a perspective, which is your professors and the assignments you've done have made it as broad and interesting as possible. But the real world affords all its own sort of surprises and experiences, and they're inevitably going to be different and broader than what you encountered. And if you can kind of carry the same enthusiasm and curiosity out into that journey that you had in school, every single, everything you do is going to have an opportunity to think like a designer, to react like a designer, to kind of prove yourself as a designer, and to learn about design as it's in the real world. How do you decide where you want to work and what you want to do? How do you decide once you start getting an idea about that, how do you strategize about getting your foot in the door, so to speak, at a place you're interested in? And in some ways, not everything's a design problem, but if you're a designer, you can make those things design problems to a certain degree.
Yeah.
Design problems that have interesting solutions, the thinking of which and the solving of which can be a pleasure and an experience in and of themselves, right? So I think it's always hard. It was hard in June 1980. My lovely wife, the now psychotherapist, had an MBA, and what's easy to forget now is that the country was in a really crummy recession in summer 1980, and she looked for a job without success for 6 months. And this is how you look for a job in June 1980, children. Sorry. Dorothy, my lovely wife, was trying to get a job either at an ad agency as an account executive or in the marketing department of of a corporation, right? She would go to the library in New York and go to find books that had addresses and names of people who worked at places like ad agencies and corporations. Because we were just two dumb kids from Ohio, well, I'll speak for myself, I was a dumb kid from Ohio and she was a bright young woman from Ohio, but we did not arrive in New York with a whole bunch of contacts and a whole bunch of a big network of supporters, right? And like in those days, having gone to an East Coast school and having been plugged into a network of supportive people, was actually, that's when it really counted for something, if dad could call up and put in a call to his friend from prep school at J. Walter Thompson and kind of get you an interview, boy, that was a lot easier than what Dorothy was doing. Going to the library, copying out in longhand these names and addresses, coming back to our tiny squalid apartment, sitting at a electric typewriter, typing letters one at a time on 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper, folding those pieces of paper into thirds and putting them in envelopes upon which you would also type the address and the recipient of the letter, getting a stamp, licking the stamp, affixing that to the envelope, then taking that out, putting it in a mailbox, and then waiting to see if that person would arrive. And she did that like more than 100 times. There were like 100 plus letters went out, each one individually typed, each one with a stamp, each one in a mailbox, each one sent like a message in a bottle to an unknowing, uncaring void.
With fingers crossed.
To people who might or might not be there, to places about which she really could barely know anything. Say you were curious about the work that J. Walter Thompson did, there might be some books in the library that had information about J. Walter Thompson. There might be, maybe your library subscribed to Advertising Age or Adweek magazine, in which case you could like read them to kind of get up to speed. But Jesus, for the most part, you were kind of just listening for the tiniest little signals that were coming in through amidst a bunch of static. Now, luckily, just like now, everyone was in the same boat, except I realize now, except for those kids who went to Princeton and Harvard and Yale and had dads who had friends from prep school. But I mean, it was amazing how brittle and hard and cold the world was back then, if you were a young person in an unfamiliar world. Now, everyone has access to so much information. And if you let your curiosity kind of guide you to things that you're enthusiastic about, that you find exciting and interesting and appealing, and you kind of use that as the first thing that guides you in your, in your quest to kind of find your future in design, that's actually already so much more than people had in 1980, or as Paula DeMarco says, in 1991, or, until really the invention of the internet. There was like no way to communicate, no way to kind of like research these things, and most importantly, no way to kind of make yourself be known in that world, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I had a big ass physical portfolio, one that I could take and show to someone, or more likely in New York, drop it off in their studio and assume that someone might look at it overnight before I picked it up 24 hours later, and maybe they might leave a note in it, or maybe not. And it was, now, when there's nothing more exciting for me now when we have a chance to hire someone new for our team, or even when we have a chance to bring in an intern, just to sort of like see the kinds of work that people have available to look at online, to kind of get a sense of what their personalities are, to, we've done interviews with potential candidates using exactly this sort of technology, using Zoom or Skype or something like that. Mm-hmm. And it's just completely different. And none of those things have changed. I mean, what's changed is that the whole world is kind of holding its breath, trying to figure out, what's going to happen next week or what's going to happen next month. But this can only go on for so long, and eventually when we come out the other side, people will sort of start to figure out, okay, now what, where do we go from here? And And in a way, setting, God having put his finger on the reset button for the whole world, and kind of turned it off and turned it on again. Sometimes that can fix a lot of bugs, and sometimes that can kind of, things can get messed up pretty bad too.
Yeah.
But I still think it's in a way, there's something about the moment, which is, the tools that we've been given to navigate the moment are just something that's easy to take for granted, particularly if you've known them your whole life. But I'd encourage all of you to kind of appreciate the fact that that we can have this conversation, for instance, that you can ask me a question that you could really, as Nick said, you could ask almost anyone a question at this moment and be more likely than not to get an answer, than if you asked them this question a month ago,
Yeah. Would there be anything you'd be doing different if you were in their shoes at this point? So most of our students, and I'm assuming some of the others that have joined us today, are probably right in the middle of putting their first professional portfolio together. And we really stress, case studies and objective and showing your strategy and your process. So when you're looking at these folks coming in and considering the transition time we're in, what would you be doing differently to help yourself stand out?
I think, well, for one thing, I'll preface this with a bit of a caveat that I almost always use. In my job today, I have the way Pentagram is structured. It's like a partnership where each of the partners, and there are 25 partners around the world, each of us sort of runs like a small office within a small studio within the overall firm, basically.
Yeah.
And so I have a dozen people on my team, and I sit, alongside my other 9 partners in New York, Abbott Miller and Matt Willey, Paula Scher, Eddie Opara, Emily Oberman, Luke Heyman, Natasha Jen, Michael Garricky. That doesn't sound like 10, but I must be leaving someone out. Okay, but at any rate, there's a bunch of us who all sit there, right? And one thing I've noticed is when we're talking about our designers, when we're talking about, hey, I need some, I'm looking for someone to help me with this. All of us tend to look for different things in the designers we hire. And it's made me being conscious of that and sort of seeing it firsthand, realizing that a designer that I'm super enthusiastic about and who works really well on my team might not work as well on Paula Scher's team or Emily Oberman's team. One of, Abbott Miller's designers might not work as well on my team. It's each of us has really different things we look for and things that we would name as important things in a portfolio that we were looking for. So I don't think there's any right way to kind of put together a portfolio to look for a job. I think there are some people out there that will respond really positively to seeing process or strategy. There are other people who just want to, even in my office, among my partners, there are some that like that. There are others that just like want to see work and just kind of like, cut to the chase. There's some people who really like to see things that look very realistic. There are other people who welcome the opportunity to see personal work that looks like it might be hard to apply in a commercial setting, but still is exciting and interesting. And so the only guide that I think is really reliable, and it's hard information to get if you're in your early 20s. It's a hard advice to get and to interpret if you're in your early 20s. It would have been hard for me to interpret in my early 20s. Is just to somehow try to be yourself. Just project who you are. What do you find interesting? What parts of school have you found exciting? What do you which of your projects do you think are the ones that you're the most proud of, that you found that you found kind of not just things that you had to kind of execute step by step, ta-da, I'm done, but things that were generative, where you kind of kept getting more and more ideas as you were doing them. Those are the things, that's what you really care about. And and it sort of is, I think it actually is a lifelong quest to actually really find your voice as a designer. And the best designers and artists are people who constantly keep re-engaging with that, with that search. I mean, if you get up to the level of people like Picasso and you sort of see a retrospective of his work, and you realize that he had he had multiple times over the course of his career where he could have said, okay, I got, Cubism, I got this down. I'm just going to milk this for all it's worth and carry this through to the end, right? Instead, you just saw him sort of like think, okay, that's interesting. Now what can I do? Now what can I do? Now what can I do? There aren't that many. There are some people like that. But then for every Picasso, there's there's someone like Joseph Albers, or just any designer artist who sort of like has something that's really passionately interesting to them, and they just sort of burrow in and just kind of want to get exactly that point of view exactly right. So different critics and people have written about those two personalities, which I think in each one of us, if we're creative, are somehow in balance. There's that thing you love to do that threatens to become a rut. There's that thing that's unfamiliar to you, that if you try it is probably gonna suck because you don't know how to do it right and it's not your normal handwriting. And I think switching back and forth between those two things is actually how you move forward and change as a creative person. And so I just encourage people to just be yourself as much as possible. Don't try to I think imitating people is okay. I mean, that's how I started out, imitating people, and I'm good at it. And in a way, it impeded my ability to kind of find my own voice to a certain degree, the ease at which I could kind of mimic other people's. But I think, there's that. And there's also one last piece of advice I'll give before we throw out the questions is two pieces of contradictory advice. One, like, do lots of work. Just, if you like doing design, do lots of design, and just do it not because it's homework and not because it's practice, but just because it's fun. If you don't think it's fun to do it, don't do it, and maybe think about doing something else altogether, right? And so just do it a lot. Just figure out a way to be productive. I found that when I look back at some early work I did, I was so unbelievably bad, and I realize now that the reason I got good was just because I kept practicing. If you haven't seen it yet, there's a famous YouTube clip of the podcaster and radio star Ira Glass, who has a show called This American Life. He talks about I think it's about, he calls it taste in the creative process, and he actually talks about something that I've never heard anyone describe quite this way. But he says, the reason that you got into creative work is because you've seen things that you loved and they excited you, and you thought, I want to do that. That's what I want to do. And then you try to do it, and then you look at what you did, and you realize there's this huge gap between the thing you did and the thing that excited you. And he says that's because you have taste, right? You have taste. That's what got you into this, right? And he said the thing that is so frustrating to people is that if you have taste, if you're excited by good creative work, inevitably the work that you do is going to not look like that in the same way. And thank you, Li Sean Huang, for putting that link up there. I think that's it. Yeah.
Perfect.
It's but it's this, and he says that gap is, for one thing, if you don't see that gap, it's because you're a hack. It's because you don't have any talent and you've done something. There's, what is that syndrome called, where you're it's got a name, and it's sort of like people who are stupid but don't know they're stupid and they think they're smart. It's applied to politicians frequently. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, I think. It actually has a name, Dunning-Kruger effect. So I think there's a corollary in the creative world too, where people who just love to sing and don't realize that they're tone deaf and they have a terrible voice. You see them in the early stages of American Idol frequently, right? And likewise, I think there are some people who are like that in any creative field. But if you're not like that, what you'll see and what you'll be frustrated by and even scared a little bit by is the gap between what you're able to do and what you want to do. And Ira Glass says very explicitly, the only thing you can do is fight through that. You just have to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And amusingly, in this clip, he plays something that he recorded 7 years when he had been, from his early days. And he said, I'd already been an NPR reporter for 7 years when I recorded this, and listen how terrible it is. And he said, the only way I got beyond that was by, just pushing and pushing and practicing and practicing and practicing. So doing a lot of work is actually how you get good at that work. And, there's that Malcolm Gladwell essay about whatever it is, 100,000 hours or how many hours it took anyone to get good at what they did. And he came up with a rule that basically is his retort to people claiming that that being born with talent is the differentiator. He says, no, it's the ability to just relentlessly practice your skill. Thank you, Narek. 10,000 hours. That's what he says, right?
Perfect.
The 10,000 hour rule, and he sort of has worked it out where he calculated the Beatles had played for 10,000 hours in places like Hamburg, Germany, before they actually became the Beatles, and it was all that practice they did. And it's in Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. Thanks a lot. Also another reason I like Zoom is
perfect, right?
Because for one thing, I know everyone's name because you're wearing name tags. And secondly,
links.
I'm like, you're putting links and prompts. Every time I forget something, it just pops up on the screen, and I seem like a genius. But I will credit the people whispering the cues from off stage. Thank you for that.
That is one of the best little,
great.
add-ons for it as well.
Shockingly great. Yeah.
I'm going to switch over. I think we got a bunch of great ones coming in, and the first one came in from one of my students, William. William, you want to chime in and ask your question?
Hi, thank you for meeting with us. So my question is, now that we're leading into this post-COVID-19 world that we all don't know what's going to look like, what do you suspect, industry-wise, where design will go and what industries will probably flourish?
Well, I think I'm like everyone else, where I keep getting struck by people just attempting to predict, where these trends, where things are going based on nothing at all. This is all just so unprecedented that it's hard to figure out what'll happen coming out of this. I think that, I think a lot of different things may happen. I don't know. I'm afraid of being one of these kind of people making predictions just out of their ass. So forgive me for that. But let's say think about all the things that might happen, right? So obviously, tools that help people communicate remotely, even when even if social distancing 6 months from now is just a distant memory and everyone is just kind of hugging each other and shaking each other's hands and jamming themselves into bars and restaurants and nightclubs and performance venues and stuff like that. I still think that, having had the experience of communicating this way at all these different levels, socially and in a business context, in a social context, in a romantic context for people who are separated from loved ones. I think that they're, this is a category of design, that really has never been tested before to this degree. And I think that there's probably technologically a whole bunch of interesting things that may emerge from, as we move from the age of letter writing back in my wife in 1980, and then if you were lucky, someone would call you on the phone that was plugged into the wall in your apartment, and if you were rich, you can get an answering machine, which I don't think had been invented, as I recall, in 1980 either. But then you have a phone in your pocket, then you have a phone you can look at pictures on as people are talking to you. I mean, and think about each one of those things is actually also a different design context. So I bet there's something interesting that could happen there. So the absolute other end of the scale is think about how important physical things have become to us all. Think about, as I look across, think about your shirt or your wallpaper, William. Think about how you've arrayed those pictures behind you on the wall, for instance. All of a sudden the objects that we surround ourselves with, the environment that we live in, has become much more significant to us in the past few weeks as well, right? And one of the things I've been doing I just decided this week to do it just for fun, is on my Instagram account, I started every morning just taking one of the books from my library back there and taking a picture of the cover and some of my favorite spreads from it, and just sort of describing why it's an important book and why it's important to me as a book. And I've been really surprised. These are the most popular posts I've ever done on Instagram.
Wow.
Right.
Interesting.
And these are books from like 1953, from 1964. And the pictures I take of them, I just take them to our living room and put them on a coffee table in the morning where I think the light is sort of nice, and just take a picture of them there, as best I can, holding my iPhone as steady as possible. And then I do a little bit of research just to make sure I know the context of the book. And I just put it out there, and you can sort of, and these are like old, I'm not a bibliophile, so some of these books are banged up looking and dog-eared looking, and you can tell that people are responding, to just the tangibility of these objects, right? And that makes me suspect that, if you're a graphic designer and you care about interactivity and you care about, digital communication and things like that, there are all kinds of opportunities that have to do with the context that all of us are in right now. But at the same time, I think if you're a book designer, there is going to be a role for tangible things, for books that actually, are things that people can hold in their hand and not look at remotely, not look at in the, with everything kind of lodged in one pixel deep screen, but something that actually you can smell and touch, that has weight, that has volume, a volume that has volume. I think that's significant too. So those sort of are two ends of a fairly vast spectrum. And I think that, potentially things will emerge everywhere in between that as well. And then finally, the other thing I'd kind of urge you all to pay attention to, at this moment, is how important storytelling is, and what I'll call the narrative voice. So I mean, think about what a terrifying moment it is, where it's truly a moment where the stakes couldn't be higher. It's about life and death, right? And we've all been through different kinds of inconveniences before, but nothing like this, right? And each of us, I bet, can think of a video that was forwarded to us, or a Twitter thread, or a Facebook post where someone was describing the death, their experience with a loved one having and losing perhaps a loved one to COVID-19, the testimony from from a nurse or a doctor about what it's like to be in a hospital, the pleas that might come from someone who feels that they're trapped somewhere without the resources to face this down. Those are all individual stories, and I think what moves us as human beings are those stories. And I think so many of the things that have excited me about design, about being a graphic designer specifically, is that graphic designers get to participate in the telling of those stories. The designers of the books I'm describing, every morning that I lay down on my coffee table and take pictures of, each one of those was motivated because someone decided that there was something they wanted to communicate to the world, right? And they had a hunger to do that, and they somehow got together the resources to do that. And in the case of these books, we have evidence of that 75 years later, in some cases 50 years later, 60 years later. Likewise with those fleeting things you see online that I just described that are talking about the world we're in today. Each one of those could benefit ultimately from the interpretation that you guys, as storytellers, as people who understand how to visualize information, how to visualize a narrative. I mean, think about, you know, the firsthand experience we're all having with that right now. I think that's actually really unique to this particular moment. And I think, you know, I didn't live through, you know, despite the fact that I look old as hell, I wasn't alive during the Second World War. You know, I was too young for Vietnam. You know, sort of like, you know, this is probably you know, like a lot of baby boomers, we've skated through pretty, you know, without getting our hair mussed. And this somehow has been something that has been, you know, one of the dramas of my lifetime, and certainly for all of us it is. And I think the way it'll be remembered afterwards and the way it's communicated in the moment are both really important too. So I think, a long way to answer your question, William, I think there's lots of really interesting lessons and lots of different territories that this opens up for what design can contribute to the world. And you guys will be in a perfect, you know, because it's just like it's easier to learn a new language when you're young and much harder when you're older. I think that you guys are in a position to take this on, as bruising as it is and as painful as it is. And it'll shape you inevitably it'll shape you as designers. I mean, you don't have a say in that. And I think the trick is, you know, how can you use your talent and your imagination, your creativity to transform it into something lasting that'll go beyond this crisis and shape the way you think about your own work and what design can do in general going forward.
Yeah. There's so many great examples of your example there of storytelling. And I think you could turn the TV on and see how fast companies and brands had to change their messaging and and some of them are doing it so eloquently. And I don't know, there's certain things about it that just are so inspiring to see good creative coming out of this situation. So I'm glad you mentioned that as that one area. As designers, I always think copy, storytelling, being involved in that situation is so crucial in getting the strategy and the communication really clear. So makes a lot of sense for sure. Next question. Speaking of tangible things and books and things like that, I want to go to Michael. You had a question on sketchbooks, sketching. Go for it, man.
Awesome. Michael, big fan.
Thank you.
So one thing I was curious about is, do you keep a personal or work sketchbook, you know, with you, and how do they differ, and what kind of style do you keep it in?
I'm going to get up and walk over a couple of feet to get what I have. Okay, stand by.
You got it. You got it. Perfect. Hey, Paul, if you see any good questions you want to throw my way too, if you're scanning through them, let me know. And as well as faculty as well, if there's anything specifically, send me a note there as well.
Hi, sorry. So back in the early 80s, in about 1982 or so, I went to, I decided to, I realized from school, from going to lectures and things, I realized that I sort of was better at remembering stuff if I wrote it down somewhere. So I probably out of the supply closet at Vignelli Associates, I got one of these notebooks with that kind of pattern on it.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
And I started, and I just opened it up and I just started taking notes at meetings. And then I started inevitably, as one does, and as you guys would, kind of doing sketches for design work in the notebooks too. And then a lot of people have different ways of doing this. I have some aspects of my personality. My wife would say all aspects of my personality have a little bit of the obsessive compulsive behind it. And I sort of became attached to having these notebooks with me like everywhere I went. And so now I'm on notebook number 126.
Wow.
Is that right there? Oh, whoops, sorry.
127.
Yeah, 127. Okay. And basically in these notebooks, I left I left somewhere at one of my clients and they never found it. The other one I left in a bathroom at Heathrow Airport in London, sadly. And then so like what I have in these notebooks is like there's stuff, I don't know if you can see it, but there's stuff you can see like on the left where these are notes that I made interviewing a client at the San Diego Zoo where we just redesigned their identity. And so it's notes from the new director there and what he wanted. And then over there on the right is a quick sketch I did for the cover of a redesign we're doing for the Yale Review, which is Yale University's literary magazine. So a lot of times these sketches I do are just sort of crummy and not that great. I'm gonna try to find one that looks like a proper designer did it. But basically all of these things just have, you know, they tend to have a lot of writing in them. I'm ashamed to say, more writing than drawings, let's say. And I don't doodle in them. I'm kind of careful about that. You know, sometimes I'll just be trying to just work out a, you know, we don't do that many printed brochures anymore, but that's just trying to work out the sequence of pages in a fairly complicated little print thing we were doing for a client. Just trying to figure out the sequence of both information and the pagination of it. These are so bad. These drawings, there's nothing worth. They're so not ready for prime time. Stand by though. Hang on. I'll get something that doesn't suck. Hang on. I mean, usually the ones that actually work out best for me sometimes is when I do that thing one does now where you I can tell some of these were done because I was on a Slack conversation with one of my designers, and I wasn't in the office, and I just did a drawing, and I said, maybe do something like this, but better. I do that a lot, something like this, but better. We were, I came so close. Oh, we were asked to redesign there's something called the Commission on Presidential Debates, which runs the 4 debates that happen during a presidential election, the 3 that happen between the candidates for the president, and 1 that happens between the vice presidential candidates. And they have right now like something that looks very official with an eagle on it. They asked us to update it, and I was doing sketches like this at one point, and we actually had this really nice one that is based on that one, sort of, where it's a C form and a D form with the P in the middle for presidential was a question mark. I don't know if you can see that. But like that looked like a mouth, and that looked like a mouth, and the question was in the middle, and that was sort of the runner-up to the thing that they finally picked, which doesn't look like that at all. But you'll see that if we succeed in having those presidential debates at all. And so this is definitely this one here is definitely a note that I sent to my designer Katie, where we're trying to make a logo out of J's making an ampersand. You can sort of see all of these details. Oh yeah. This has to be longer. This has to be shorter. I often kind of sketch things that I think almost, like I'm famous. The one time I was presented with a bunch of things that I seem to say all the time, and one of them is it worked in the sketch, like where I'll sort of like do something and work in the sketch, and then I'll see it actually. They'll try to do it in real life, and it'll just look terrible. And I'll say, well, what's the problem with that? And they'll say, well, it doesn't actually line up that way. Oh, look, I still was beating it to death there. So,
you were going to make it happen somehow.
Oh, yeah, it got closer and closer, but it never made it work. But at any rate, so I've got, 127 of these, 125 of these in all. I carry the most recent one with me, which is this one, which is getting more of a workout now, just because I really have to do a lot of, I have to sort of like draw page by page things for presentations, let's say. Like, this slide should show 3 iPhones open to this page, and I have to kind of call them out that way. And then there'll still be a lot of pages with tons of writing on them like that, right? So that's what I do. Occasionally I've had a couple of bouts with doing long-term sketching projects over, 1 a day that I've done that too. And those are up there somewhere, I suppose. But the ones that actually get me through my life are these guys. And I'm not necessarily, I really just, every once in a while I've had moments in my life where I've started drawing from pleasure like I used to. I don't do enough of that actually. And occasionally some of these notes that I'm taking and some of these quick prompts that I'm giving my design team sort of don't, sort of just kind of, they sort of are like drawing, but basically they're more like note taking in a way. So all I know is that if I walk into a room and I find that I can't find this notebook anywhere, I sort of like have to stop and find it before I can kind of sit down and focus myself, so it's become a little bit of a security blanket for me.
That's awesome. Yeah. Very cool.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Thanks, Michael.
I'm glad you started showing some logo work, because I think it'd be a good segue in our next one. Christine has a really good question. Christine, are you with us? You want to chime in and ask?
Hi.
There she is.
Okay. Yeah. So you mentioned that as creatives that, finding your own personal style and your voice is something you constantly work at, and it's a journey that's never finished. So could you tell us a little bit about your experience and your journey and that's my question. Thank you.
And mine has a couple of aspects to it that are kind of unique that I wouldn't actually recommend to people. Like, as I said, I was very lucky where I lined up a job before I came to New York, and the job I lined up was to be an entry-level junior designer in excuse me, entry-level junior designer in the studio of a very well-known legendary designer named Massimo Vignelli, who that's a name some of you might recognize, right? And it's funny, even sometimes now I try to reconstruct how I knew who he was based on, in 1980. So like, you couldn't Google him. There was no Google. It was just sort of a world that had, I guess, there was design that I liked out there, but so little of it was credited to people. But somehow I found out there was this guy, Massimo Vignelli. I knew he had designed the signs in the New York City subway and the logo for Bloomingdale's department store and a couple of other things. And then, and he was like one among many designers that I dropped off my portfolio with at the end of the summer before I started my senior year. And he saw, by stroke of luck, I had dropped it off there. I didn't have a personal interview. I didn't drop it off for him to look at. I dropped it off because, note to young designers, a guy I knew at one of my internships had been a classmate of one of Vignelli's designers at design school. And he said, "Oh, if you're in New York, look up this guy, Peter. I was in school with him." And indeed, I gave him a call, and he said, I don't have time to see you. This is 1980, and I guess we were busy back in 1982 as well. And so Peter said, "I don't have time to see you. If you drop off your portfolio, I'm happy to take a look at it." So I dropped it off, and for whatever reason, I think Peter showed it to Massimo Vignelli, and Massimo liked it. I know now specifically, I can imagine why he liked it, because after I got to know him, I knew that I just happened to do I happened to sketch in a very similar way that he did. I didn't know that at the time, but we happened to do sketches the same way. And then plus, I just think I had certain aspects of my sensibility were really similar to the way that Vignelli designed, but I didn't know that either. I just liked his work. And so I think my liking his work kind of had to do, that had an effect on the kind of work that I ended up doing as a student, obviously. So we were kind of aligned somehow, but it wasn't calculated. It just was accidental. At any rate, he responded to my work. When I went in to pick up my portfolio, I got a chance to meet him, which was pretty rare. A lot of times the receptionist in one of these places would just say, "Yeah, it's one of those portfolios there," and you'd pick your portfolio out of a pile of 6, sadly, and go trudging away. In this case, they said, "Oh, wait a second, I think, could you just take a seat?" And then it turned out that Mr. Vignelli wanted to come out and say hello. And so I was just stunned by that, of course. And yet I had another year before I graduated, and I wrote them a letter and put it in an envelope and put a stamp on it and mailed it via the post office. I got a letter back from them saying that they didn't have any openings, but between they would see what would happen, as the year transpired. And it just so happened that one of the designers quit and they had an opening, so they made me a job offer that I had before I graduated. Now, I think I was the only person in my class that had a job before he graduated. Now, it's not because I was the best designer. I think it was because I just was always out there kind of hustling a little bit,
Yeah.
I mean, I was like, I was like dropping my portfolio off at the end of the summer of my junior year. Like, why? I mean, like, what was I looking for? Like I still had a whole year of school to do, but I was in New York and I thought, hell, I just want to see what the lobbies of these design firms look like, and what shape the receptionist desk was and what stuff they had hanging on the wall. And I can remember all those things very clearly about Vignelli Associates 40 years ago, to tell you the truth. But I ended up taking that job. If some of you know Massimo Vignelli's work, and that he has a very, very strong style. He has like he had an ideology about design that involved using only, everyone must only use 5 typefaces. He was a real, purist in terms of modernism. At the same time, he was a very warm and emotional Italian guy. He's an immigrant from Italy, had become naturalized as a citizen in America after practicing here for many years. But he and his wife Layla really ran it like a mom and pop place. I remember being told that my first day there. It's sort of like, I remember like a guy who had been working there took me to get a sandwich at an Italian sandwich shop and said, this place is pretty much just like Vignelli Associates. This couple runs the sandwich shop and they make you a mortadella sandwich and some provolone cheese. And it's across the street and we're doing design work, but it's like run by an Italian couple. And when you think of it that way, it sort of clears things up a little bit. And so it was like very clean, beautiful, modernist design, but being done with a lot of heart behind it. And I think my goal was to stay there for maybe 18 months and move on and have a different experience. I ended up staying there for a little bit more than 10 years. So you don't have to do that. I don't think it's necessarily good for anyone to stay in their first job for 10 years unless you want to, and I wanted to. But it took me, while I was there, I sort of worked my way, Vignelli's style I found very easy to imitate, actually, and he was very flattered by having someone who was so enthusiastic about imitating his style, which he didn't think of it as his style. He thought of it as good design. And so he thought because I could do his style, he thought I was a good designer. And I was willing to kind of go along with that. I also love designing. I learned so much just actually by trying to imitate his style, having him come over to me and say, no. You want to have these things line up with that. Don't indent that there. Have this line up with that. And then this is just a little bit too big here. You should make this smaller so there's more, so you learn these things just by, if you've got a master teacher, even if that person's not teaching you, if you're a musician and your apprentice, if your teacher is not playing the style or the kind of way that you ultimately want to play, you can learn so much just by having them say, no, do it this way, do it that way. It just trains your fingers and your eyes and your mind to think a different way. So I ended up being there for, like I said, a decade. And over that period, I started kind of like discovering in myself, as one would, things that I was interested in. Like I was famous for, taking on every single extra project you could take on. I worked incessantly to a degree that I'm not sure I recommend anymore. I used to be a real proponent for, working 18-hour days because that was how you got good. I know now, I think about, at least, I have 3 kids who would have benefited from me working a little bit less in the office and me being home more. And I respect people that actually realize that in the moment instead of realize that with regret and try to make up for it later in life, as I have. And so again, staying in some place for 10 years, don't do what I did. Working 18-hour days, don't do what I did. Those aren't the only paths to success. However, it is what I did. So God help me. And as I was doing those long days, a lot of times I just would do experimental work, and in some cases did stuff that Massimo just hated. And he sort of was like judgmental. I did a poster for the AIGA New York chapter for an event, and I used Franklin Gothic, a typeface that I assume some of you are familiar with, and is hardly a controversial typeface. And I remember him saying to me, "What is this typeface?" And I said, "What is this?" And I said, "Franklin Gothic." Why are you using that? And I said, "I don't know, just for fun." Sharon observes it's very similar to Helvetica. No, it isn't. Not if you're Massimo Vignelli. It's nowhere fucking like Helvetica. Trust me. It is
rule number one.
Yeah, it is a far cry from Helvetica. It's an American typeface that well predated Helvetica, and actually, doesn't have anywhere near the refinement of Helvetica, which is what I sort of liked about it. It has sort of had a personality to it that I just wanted to feel in my fingers a little bit. I remember him saying, "Why?" And he may have said, "Why don't you use Helvetica if you want something like that?" And I said, "I don't know. I felt like it," and he just thought it was, that was sort of like not what his style was. But I would try these different things, and then eventually I sort of came to think, if I'm ever going to find out what I am outside of it, I really have to move out. And I was really trusted by the Vignellis, had a great relationship with them. And it was very difficult to kind of finally quit, but I did. And I went right from there to being probably at 33 years old, the youngest partner at Pentagram, certainly the newest partner at Pentagram. And again, it was interesting because I had lost my appetite for having my own studio and being all by myself with my own name on the door. I liked being around different people. I liked having a lot of activity around me. I liked having people who were designing things around me that I could look at that had nothing to do with my work, and which, Vignelli had a lot of different activities happening there, and I would be on one project and other designers would be working on other things, and I found that really stimulating, and I thought it'd be lonely to go off on my own. And luckily, Pentagram was exactly what I was looking for, because I had the autonomy that I wanted. I was able to kind of like do my own work, but do it in the context with these other partners. And at that point, it was a small office, just maybe 30 people. I joined, and Paula Scher joined at about the same time in 1990. And we joined Colin Forbes and Woody Pirtle and Peter Harrison, who had been running that office as a 3-person office, and we became the 4th and 5th partners there. And then I started learning a whole different thing, getting advice from Paula about how to do things, or learning from someone older like Colin Forbes, or someone whose work was really different than mine, but that I really admired, like Woody Pirtle. It was just really exciting for me. And so I've been in that job now for 30 years, if you're doing the math. And so I have the most boring resume in the world, just having had 2 jobs over the course of my professional career. By the way, I've been married to the same woman for 40 years. She was the first girl I kissed in my life on February 20th, 1974. And so there's a pattern that emerges that, again, I've told all my kids, you don't have to marry the first person you kiss. Don't do what I did. Don't do what Mom did. Although my wife actually had a boyfriend before me. My story is not that useful as a model, except to the degree that I think it goes back to that advice that I had earlier, where kind of finding your own, trying to figure out what kind of design you really want to do it's a long journey. And, for me, it was, I'd say it's still happening to a certain degree, and certainly was happening, in full force well into my 30s, well into my 40s. And, my partner, Paula Scher, is one who talks a lot about, a career and a life in design being a series of steps and landings, in a way where you have periods where you're going up the steps and you find yourself on a landing, which is good, because that's, architects put landings on staircases so you don't have heart attacks going up 4 stories of stairs without a break, right? Those landings provide you a chance to catch your breath, to sort of just make it step by step up the ladder. And I think sometimes you'll be in a period where you don't think you've done anything new, and that sense of restlessness a lot of times, getting back to Ira Glass, kind of compels you to try something new. And you don't necessarily have to change jobs all the time to achieve that, although that's a way that a lot of people do it. A lot of times it's just being attentive to the opportunities that a new project is affording, or taking on something that's outside your comfort zone, or approaching it in a way that's not the way you would usually approach it. Those are all things that I've tried to do to sort of like change up my my approach.
Great. Awesome. Next one up, I believe we got a great question from Emily. Emily, are you with us?
Hi, I'm right here. I think there was someone before me.
Oh, that's okay. Go for it.
Okay. Let's see. Where is it? Okay. Thank you. Thank you for taking your time to be here.
You're welcome, Emily. Thank you.
So my question I had was, is there one piece, or is like one crucial piece of advice that you go back to within design, like either for every project, or it's just something that's proven itself to be true over the years?
Yeah, these are some of my favorite pieces of advice. One of my mentors who predated Massimo Vignelli, was the guy who was a boss at one of my internships, a guy named Chris Pullman, who was the head of the design department at WGBH Television in Boston. That's their public television station. It's probably the premier public television station in the United States. They have to this day, but they had in those days, in the 70s, when I was in school, this amazing in-house arts, what was then a little design studio. And we were doing like student guides to their educational programming, and occasionally doing a book would be a spin-off of one of their shows or something like that. And I'm in touch with Chris to this day, actually. And he won the AIGA medal. WGBH won the Corporate Design Leadership Award. So in effect, he won the medal twice. He's just an amazing guy. Has taught at Yale, his alma mater, Yale University. He was a MFA grad from there and has taught there for decades and decades. And I have, he's just a great teacher and a great person. And I remember I was like, they had two interns, and I was like the junior intern, right? I wasn't just an intern, I was the junior intern. And so there was another intern named Lorraine Ferguson, who was like the senior intern. And I was, I was so eager to show what I could do that I got some, as I remember, I got some like stupid job that they would trust to a junior intern just because they felt sorry for him, which was maybe to design like a poster to hang up in the halls of the building for the blood drive, like, about giving blood, and in my memory, I sort of worked on this for a solid week, and I was determined to show, every single thing I wanted to do as a designer all at once on this poster, by like making it look like a combination of all these different designers who had influenced me, who I admired, who I thought he might admire, and all this stuff. It was just so jazzed up and complicated and designy. And he usually didn't pay that much attention to the work I was doing, because I was, as I said, the junior intern. And I remember he walked by the desk and said, "What's that?" I said, "Oh, it's that poster for the blood drive that Doug asked me to do." He said, "For the blood drive," and he said, "Yeah." He says, "So this is supposed to make people give blood?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Let's see. Can I make a suggestion?" And he says, and then he basically said, "I think you should take this part off. I think you should probably lose this part. I think maybe this is too small. Why don't you just take this stuff and make it all the same size?" And when it was done, it was basically a poster that just said, "Give blood now," in really big type. And then I said, "That's it?" And he said, "Yeah." Then he said, "Why avoid the obvious?" And I sort of have remembered that whole thing about avoiding the obvious. I think as designers, we try very hard because we're trying, I think, we want to be creative, but less admirably, we want people to think we're creative. And I think we feel sometimes that unless we're constantly demonstrating how creative we are, we're not doing our jobs right. And I think sometimes a lot of times I'll sort of start a project with my designers when I'm working on it. I'm saying, okay, what's like the most obvious thing we could do with this? I mean, if we just had to, you know, if it just was the most obvious solution in the world and we weren't trying to get credit for being clever, what would we do? And if you do that, you start with that, then you think, okay, how can we bring some joy and surprise into people's life? How can you make it something a little bit more special? And I do think we ended up making that blood posters a little bit more special somehow. But I do think, I remember sort of like this whole idea of not avoiding the obvious as a thing. And then the other advice I had was from my partner, Paula, who I've mentioned a couple of times. And she was quoting her husband, Seymour Quast, one of the co-founders of Pushpin Studios with Milton Glaser. And I was working on this, project, and it was one of those things where I got off on the wrong foot and it was just going worse and worse. And I just remember I was in this mode where I just kept thinking, I'm not, you know, I've got this idea. I know it. I know it. I know I can do it. And the client was rejecting it. I knew it wasn't right. I could tell it wasn't right, but I kept thinking it was just like 1 hour away, one more thing away, one more something away from being perfect. And I remember, I said to Paula, she said, "What's wrong?" And I said, I've got this really good idea, but I just can't make it work. And she like looked at it. I'm not sure she looked at it. She just said, maybe it's not a good idea. And then and then she said, you know, my husband, you know, Seymour has this thing where he says, and I don't think he made this up because I've heard versions of it elsewhere, but it's, if you're digging a hole in the wrong place, making it deeper doesn't help. And actually hearing that was so liberating to me, because I think one of the things that happens to us as designers, and I think this might be related to that first experience I had as an intern, was that, you know, we sort of are so fixed on sort of, you know, our work ethic kind of makes us think if we just sort of bear down and kind of just like keep pushing and pushing and pushing, by God, you know, everyone can kind of like do it. You know, I mean, I can make this work. I can make this happen. And sometimes it takes just the liberating feel. And this happened on that job was, I just thought, you know, and I remember I said to the designer who was working with me, I said, we're done with this. I want to come in tomorrow morning and just pretend we've never worked on this before. And what would we do if we could do anything we wanted? And it was just it was so fun and liberating to come in. And I remember when we finally hit it, I was actually terrified because the client had already seen us come in. We were doing this very kind of thing that sort of was corresponding to a series of pre-agreed check-ins and a schedule and everything else. And I remember calling up the client, like when I realized that we were going to do something completely different, that all of a sudden I realized could work. And I said to her, at that meeting on Wednesday, would you mind if we're not going to show you anything we've done so far. We have something completely new. And they had never said what we were doing was bad. They just kept saying, it's not quite there yet. But I said, we're going to show you something completely new. And she just said, oh, thank God. And so we came in, had this, and it was just a matter of, you know, I sometimes use the metaphor. Sometimes you're trying to get into a house and the front door is locked. And first you try to pick the lock and then you try to jigger it. Then you think, well, maybe I can kind of like, you know, take the door off its hinges. And then you sort of think, well, I'm just going to kind of get the biggest battering ram I can get and just keep smashing against the door till it's reduced to splinters. And then meanwhile, 20 paces away on the other side of the house is a screen door that's always unlocked. And you just can kind of walk, if you walk all the way around it, you might find this like open door, open window. You open, you walk right in, and it's that easy, right? And so sometimes it's like that with design. And what happens is, we sort of think, well, I'm the kind of guy that goes in the front door. That front door looks like the entrance, and by God, I'm going to enter that way or die trying. And then all it takes is the ability to sort of say, stop, wait a second. I'm just going to go for a little walk and see what else I can find. And sure enough, there's that door that's open a crack that doesn't need a key at all. You can just kind of walk right in without a sweat. So digging a hole in the wrong place, avoiding the obvious, these are all sort of the same things. And a lot of it just has to do with maybe trusting your instincts, maybe with kind of releasing yourself from that work ethic that I've been dedicated to my whole life and just saying, well, wait, just stop, walk away, turn around, try something new. Those are all things that I think come easily to some designers that don't come easily for me. So I've remembered both those pieces of advice for my entire life, literally.
That's
Thank
great.
you so much.
Good question, Emily.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks for the question.
Thanks. I'm going to sum up a few people because I think a lot of people are asking something very similar to this, and then I want to change it because you've got a lot of educators and faculty members in this room as well. So hopefully you can give us a little insight here. Over the years, you've hired obviously many people, many interns. You've seen how design has been emerging over the time. What schools, what methods, what processes from these schools have consistently aligned with the skills that you are looking for and the talent you want to grab? Because you got a bunch of us here. Anything you can give us that could be a great bit of insight for us to change our ways as well and what we could start doing differently.
Nick, that's a great question. And so again, this may be reassuring or confusing, but I'm proud on my team. When I think about the designers that work for me, almost no two of them have. I'm not a fan of hiring from the same school, for instance. Even when I've thanks partly to Chris Pullman, I began teaching at Yale in the MFA program. Not as consistently as him and not as well as him, but for the past 25 years or so. And yet I probably have never had more than two people from Yale working for me at one time, even though I sort of see all of them all the time. I really try to have, I value the fact that having diverse points of view is a good thing. And right now I have, when I think about my designers, I have one Yale MFA. I've got someone who went to Middlebury College and then I think went to Parsons. Someone who went to University of Washington in Seattle, studied with Doug Wadden in his latter days. Someone who went to NC State. So for all, people from all over the place. And what I find I value more than anything else are people that have the capacity to be curious about the context within which they're designing. And this is what I mean by that. Any design problem you have has all these formal aspects to it that are really important and really, are the way that we sort of prove partly that we're good designers. And I remember at the beginning, those were all I could see, in that story about the blood poster is exactly that. That wasn't about, I wasn't even imagining, in those days, like, what would make someone want to give blood in the hallways of WGBH? I just was thinking, it's, what typeface, what color, what other graphic motifs, how do I resolve the white space? How do I do something that feels, it's like an arresting visual thing? And instead of actually thinking about human communication in a specific context with other human beings with a goal towards making them undertake some action because of something I've put in front of them, right? Everything I just said sounds like the most damn obvious stuff in the world, but man, it was interesting how easy it was for me to ignore that, partly because I've spent all my years of school had to do with doing stuff with typefaces and doing stuff with composition and doing stuff with just mastering my skill as a formal designer, right? And so the designers that I find work most happily on my team are ones when if they're showing me a piece in their portfolio and it's a text, by, whomever, they've been given a text by Malcolm Gladwell to, they've been asked to type something, to do something on the theme of 10,000 Hours from Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. By Malcolm Gladwell. I'll say something like, did you read that essay? Do you think it's true? And you'd be surprised how many people are completely taken aback by that question. The idea that they would, people seldom say, I've never had anyone say, nah, to hell with it. It's just a bunch of letters to me. I don't care. I don't care. Everybody tries to pretend they read the thing, right? But often they don't think having an opinion about it or giving it that much thought or engaging with the specifics of it is as important as making something look really cool. And I appreciate people that can make things look really cool. And a lot of times, man, if I'm flipping through Instagram or if I'm online looking at stuff, things that look really cool, you know, they will jump out, at least if it looks really cool in a way that I think is really cool. And everyone has a different idea about what really cool is, I suppose.
Yeah.
But the things that actually lead to a happy experience as a working designer, at least on my team, is, you know, if I've, you know, like my designer who I was working with to work on that commission for presidential debates project, he was like so into the history of the debates, into the sort of insignia that they had used over the years, sort of, you know, kind of was so attentive to, you know, when the client is talking about how critical it is that they can't be seen to be partisan, to be favoring, you know, Republicans or Democrats. They can't even be seen to be favoring the idea that America will only and always have a two-party system. And so a part of the problem with kind of like, here's a mouth and here's a mouth and a question mark in the middle, it's presupposing that America is only a two-party system and that a debate can only happen between two people. And in fact, we've had a recent history of three people on that debate stage, as recently as Ross Perot in '92, as I recall, and maybe even since then too. You know,
yeah.
But like, you know, and what's interesting is if you care about those things, that's the territory in which you can really engage with clients. It has nothing, you know. I said evidently somewhere that if you're in a meeting and you start talking, and if you're in a design meeting with a client and you start talking about typefaces, it means you're losing, actually. And you know, in the best meetings I've had, we're only talking about what the subject matter is and what the context is and who the audience is and what the goals are. And it's not because I think that's a way to hustle a client. It's not to distract them, to kind of lull them into a state of trust so I can slip through the cool looking design that I want to do. It's because they can tell that I genuinely find that stuff interesting. And my worst projects over the years, and the things that I actually get afraid of now, it's not like trying to do something new that I don't know how to do. It's those occasions where I'm working on something where I genuinely don't care about the subject, and worse yet, where I actually have a certain degree of a negative feeling about the subject. I've only done that a couple of times, and I tried to not do it at all anymore. But boy, I've had some bad experiences where there's just a mismatch between me and the subject matter that I'm attempting to communicate. And so, as educators, one of the things that I value is when I can sense that that the student I'm working with has been encouraged to not just really master sort of the design tools and design skills, but they're understanding that that all of that is happening in context that has to do with their connection with other human beings, and, you know, the ideas and emotions and goals and dreams of those other human beings, right? And it's hard to do if you're, you know, nowadays it's not just a matter of, you know, knowing the kind of skills that I needed to know back in, you know, 1975 to 1980, but it's all the kinds of software programs people expected to master, all the different kinds of skills that include, you know, programming and animation and all sorts of things that, you know, there's a lot to learn just at the technical level. And then on top of that, to still maintain some sort of connection to the world that exists beyond design, that world that of people you're just trying to get to sign up for the blood drive, you know, while you're worrying about typefaces and PMS colors, is that's hard to kind of keep the focus on. But if you're lucky, you have a few encounters, as I've had over the course of my life, where that gets driven home. So, you know, that's assignments where your students are being kind of provoked to engage with content, I guess is the word for it, are things that I always value and look for in portfolios. And I find that some of your students won't respond well to that, and that's okay, because I think there's a kind of design work that actually is about kind of formal sensation and about image that I respect as well. And some of the designer, you know, to tell you the truth, Massimo Vendielli was someone who actually was that degree of formalism had a lot to do with his idea of how something should look. And you know, he could take 3 books on 3 completely different subjects and make them look almost exactly the same, and make them all look beautiful and collectible and great. But still, he often said, if I'm setting, you know, he's in that movie Helvetica, he said something like, if I'm picking a typeface for the word dog, I don't think the typeface should bark, you know, and I get it, right? You know, yet a dog is a dog, and people who love dogs, you know, there's something about dogs, right? So, so I think there's, we can all have very different points of view about how this plays out, but I think one of the things that I value is that attention to content, I suspect.
Good. How are you doing on time? We got room for one more?
Yeah, room for one more. Let's do it.
Perfect. I'm going to do this. First one to raise their hand in the participant window. I will allow you to come on in and raise your hand, and let's see what happens. Is it Kaya? Are you there?
Yes, I'm
perfect.
Here.
Hey, there you are.
Hi.
Hi.
Also, just chiming with the chat. Thank you so much for these insights and taking the time.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
I'm super thankful. This is amazing. I actually have 2 questions. I know you're short on time. They're a little bit separate, but the first one is, I see those are awesome books in the background.
Yep.
Could you recommend or share what 3 books had the most profound and insightful impact on your life? And then
yeah.
sorry, bless you. And then the second question is, in your essay on 79 essays on design, I remember there was one essay that you wrote about feeling like a plagiarist, like a copycat,
yeah.
consciously
Yep.
took inspiration. Do you still agree with that statement? And
yeah. No, it literally just happened again to me. I did a poster that I really liked, and then I saw a Joseph Miller Brockman poster that was sort of the poster that I inadvertently was stealing from. Now, luckily, you could do worse than steal from Joseph Miller Brockman, and he's sort of like Vignelli, where I'm not sure you'd mind if people stole from that much. But I thought, you know, we did this poster, and I just remember seeing it as a sketch and thinking, "Ooh, this looks so. I love the way this looks. This looks great." And it sort of was like resonating with me in this very way that I realize now is sort of suspicious. And it's because, you know, it's just a few moves away from being one of his famous concert posters that he did. And no one's busted me on it, interestingly enough. You know, maybe it looks more like it than I thought, but I still think there's something to watch out for. It's still a scary thing. There are so many people with ideas out there, and so many published ideas in a way that, you know, someone can say, you know, it makes it hard. And of course, if you're trying to design a very simple logo, your
chances are higher.
Yeah, your chances are higher, and it's like very scary. And there are legal ramifications to inadvertent plagiarism, even if you didn't mean it. So it's interesting. I sort of agree with Howard. I'm sorry, I glanced. Dogs are good for Franklin. Your second question about the books that I think have really affected the way I think about design. I would name, actually, there's a piece that I did that that maybe someone can kind of throw up the link on really fast. It was published. There's a website called It's Nice That, and they asked me what 5 books really influenced me. I picked books that I thought were a little unexpected, but a couple of them are kind of on the list that I would keep today. So the one that wasn't on that list was Thoughts on Design by Paul Rand. That was the very first book he wrote when he was still a fairly young designer. He updated it over the years, and he wrote books after that one. But his first one, which was very short, very poetic in a way, and has sort of his oldest work in it, has work that he was doing back in the 40s and 50s, it's just a beautiful, lovely book. Chronicle republished a facsimile of the original edition. And it's a really handsome, just lovely, lovely book. One of the books that was on that list that I had back in the day, and it's an architecture book. It's not for everyone. It's sort of, in a way, a completely different way of thinking about design. But it's a book called The Life and Death of Great American Cities by Jane Jacobs. She was an urban planner, and she was sort of the opposite of the Vignelli modernist tradition, in that she thought the way you should design cities for people, and the best way to figure out how to design a city for people is to watch how people use cities. And so she was all about, not about like, let's bulldoze neighborhoods and just kind of, put up giant, beautiful towers that are iconic. Instead, watch how people use their front stoops, watch how they use alleyways. And it's sort of about design through observation. And I find actually what's interesting is that even though she wrote this book in the mid 60s, and it has, nary a reference to user interface design or UX or anything like that, I think that the principle she talks about and the spirit that she's making her point is very much about respecting users in a way, and responding and being empathetic to what users do, whether or not they're city dwellers or just someone you're asking to, engage with a app, right? And so that's my, that's the second one, I would say. And maybe just because it had such an influence on me when I was, a very young designer in the 70s, was, and again, these are all 3 design books, and I think you should read all kinds of books that aren't design books. Please do that. I don't think designers have to read design books at all. But if you wanted 3 kind of design books, the Rand book, the Jane Jacobs book, and the one that actually, had a real influence on me was Milton Glazer's first book, the one with the Dylan cover, which my parents gave me as a present when I was, going off to design school back in, 1975. And I just remember, he's very, the tone of voice that he strikes as he goes through that book is just like Milton Glaser is today. It's generous, it's wise, it's thoughtful, it has a kind of humility to it, but also a kind of fierce dedication to the idea that what we're doing is an art form. He has a kind of virtuosity that he really demonstrates in the pages of that book. And I remember just being so excited to sort of see that design can be practiced in all these different kinds of ways. One of the books that I featured on my Instagram feed was a book that he designed back in the mid 60s. That was just a throwaway piece of trash that I bet he did just for the money. And yet, when I was looking at it and photographing the pages of it, I was thinking, boy, they had no money to spend on this. They probably banged it out in one weekend with a couple of late nights and some coffee. And it just has so much tender loving care, way more than they had to put on every page. You can tell that this was way more than was asked for, way more than anyone that bought the book wanted. But what an act of generosity that is, to give people more than they expected, more than they paid for, more than they wanted, to take them something they didn't expect, right? And so that Milton Glaser book, which I think is just graphic design, Milton Glaser, is a great book as well. So I could go. You can tell I love books. In this house alone, there's 3 times as many books as you see there. And wow. In my office, there's one more shelf that's about that crowded, where I think most of the books I've been describing actually are. So, wow. If you like to read, it's a great time to be a designer, a great time to be stuck in your house, actually, now that I think of it.
Very true.
Yeah.
If we got room for one more, Augie, you had the last question.
Let it go.
Go for it, Augie.
Yes. Hey, if time permits, I wanted to ask you this question. It's a pleasure. So I wanted to know what you think about the future of graphic design and any new industries that might come about, or like what you think would be of value within the next 20 years or so.
Well, as I've said earlier, this is a time where I'm not sure what life is going to be like next week, never mind in 20 years. I do think I had this, someone asked me that question. I was trying to write it down. It just sounded so stupid when I was writing it that I finally gave up. But I do think we're getting very close to a point where almost anyone, how, like, if that show Stranger Things.
Oh yeah.
Where it has the opening sequence and it's got that Ed Bengat typeface and it's kind of doing that thing. And there's a website where you could type in Augie Martinez and it shows up in the Stranger Things typeface.
Augie's done that.
Yeah, who hasn't, right? But I bet that we are really close to if you just, we're really close to the point where you could get some sort of program and you just would type in, and someone's going to tell me this is already there. I'll keep my eye on the chat. You could type in "give blood now" and then say, like Sister Corita Kent, "give blood now" like Joseph Miller Brockman, "give blood now" like Massimo Vignelli, "give blood now" like Paula Scher, and hit boom, and like that, you'd have a poster that was not just like some hacked together thing, but a pretty convincing piece of graphic design.
Yeah.
And so to me, I wonder if that happens, if that degree of stylization can happen, and it's, you know, almost, it's so universally available that it is worth exactly 0 pennies. You know, that means that all of us, you know, and there's a whole thing about form versus content that I've been talking about on and off all afternoon. But I think, you know, once we get to that point, that means that designers have to bring something different to the table.
Yeah.
And it can't just be style. It can't just be our finesse with typesetting. It can't be all the skills that I've spent, you know, half a lifetime kind of wallowing in and mastering and honing and celebrating. You know, I still will. And I still, even when I described that piece of software, I thought, I'd love to do that. That sounds like a blast. However, I do think that, you know, how you actually provide real value to the world and how you really communicate with people in an age where, you know, for instance, you know, you guys might be a little bit too young to remember MySpace, but, you know, there was a time when people thought there'd be this thing called that face, you know, that something like Facebook could never work because everyone would want their own page to look different, to express their personality. So if I was visiting Augie Martinez, it would look, you know, you would pick the backgrounds, the typefaces, the colors, and everything. Instead, you know, the Facebook people had a theory that isn't what people wanted. What people wanted was just the content, and they would let the Facebook designers design exactly how that content would be displayed and decide a whole lot of other things as well, right? And so I think that tension between who decides, who customizes, how do we express what's personal, how do we express what's universal? To me, those are all design questions, and they're deep, confusing design questions, so confusing that I don't feel even that I can articulate them with any particular expertise. But I do think that those are the questions that are going to dominate your careers, I predict, right? And in the face of all of that, though, all of you may have a moment where you get to go back and make something with your hands that has nothing at all to do with an algorithm, nothing at all to do with pressing a button and having an immediate resolution, but has to do with something that's hard to do, that takes time to do, and takes actual a real commitment to do too. And I think those two things, the crafting you can make with your hand and the huge ideas that are dominating the way we actually communicate in the real world, I think are, you know, those two ranges still will define the extremes of the world that we navigate. And the thing that you guys will be encountering, I predict, you know, for the rest of your lives.
Yeah, you're very right.
And it'll be great. It'll be so much fun to do. Trust me, it'll be fun.
Yeah, I think for anybody who's been to Adobe Max for the last few years, everything you just described is very much showing its face in our industry. These the AI and things that are making it obviously more productive and easier for us, and those time-consuming things. But I think you nailed it by saying we'll have to stand out even more as great designers, because that still can't be replaced.
Yeah,
and it's
exactly
those things that, what a great way to kind of sum it up. That's awesome.
Exactly.
I think we're good, guys. Thank you everybody for joining. Michael, thank you so much for joining us, man.
Thank you so much.
Really appreciate this. Really appreciate this. We'll be sharing this with everybody. So, and I'm going to try to find a way to maybe even get a good recap of everybody on here, but you got 1,000 thank yous coming through here.
Yeah. Mine too.
I'm willing to stay on if there's any faculty or students that want to stay on after this and chat. More than happy to stay on.
And Nick, if there's anything that I mentioned that you want to track down or figure out, let me know, and I'll be more than happy to fill in the blanks. Okay. Good luck to everyone.
Absolutely.
It's going to be great. Okay.
You got it. Thanks again, Mike.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
You got it. Perfect. And there's my bookshelf. I couldn't resist. Yeah, if you guys want to stay on for a while, I'm sure there's a lot of you guys here that are in the same boat. And if there's any questions, maybe some students want to ask other students, or some faculty want to ask other faculty. We got a bunch of great people on here still. I think let's take advantage of it.
Nick, I think you should ask him to ask Paula Shear to speak next.
Okay, let's do it. Let's do it. Part 2, right?
Yes.
That'd be awesome.
That'd be great. Does any students have some other questions they were hoping to ask, or maybe want to take advantage of other folks here? Go for
so
it.
I asked my question, but I think he misunderstood. Because I heard he said that he encourages us to read non-design books, and I was hoping to get his top 3 non-design recommendations, but I don't want to like interrupt him.
Oh, gotcha.
Could you possibly ask him that to clear that up? That would be really awesome.
Sure.
To just
Yep.
hear, like, yeah, just in life.
Okay, good. I like that he did bring up the architecture, or the city planning and the architecture book, as a way of, like, if you really want to know how to design for a city, you got to see how a city works. You know, that was pretty interesting. That was pretty cool. Go ahead,
Very
Allison.
interesting with the current climate too. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, maybe Allison, are you still there? Nope, I guess she left. Anybody else?
Somebody raised their hand. Oh, is there more hands?
Was that Nar? You want to go? Anybody?
Hard to tell who's raising with their hand.
What time do you present at Canceled Con tomorrow, or the next day?
Oh, Cancel Con is, we have 2, Mitch might help me out here a little bit. We have 2 2-hour blocks. We're doing portfolio reviews both Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah, we're doing, I think, 10 to 12 Pacific time, Saturday and Sunday.
There you go. Yep. Is everybody signed up for Cancel Con tomorrow?
Hell yeah.
Good.
No, where is that?
Cancelcon.com. If you go on there, you can RSVP. It's a 2-day event. There's about 50 plus guest designers all chiming in. They each have like 30-minute windows. With all of the conventions and creative conferences that have been canceled over the next few months, this guy, Andrew, decided to put together this online all Zoom thing. And while all those are going on, there's a group of us that will be doing portfolio reviews in a separate room that students can come on and put in their PDF, and we'll critique it live with them. Victor will be a part of it, Mitch as well. I'm not sure if there's anybody else on that's there, but that's happening tomorrow and Sunday.
Just to be clear, I think that we have all the portfolio reviews submissions already. So the applications are closed. I have to check those numbers. But I think we have the 24 that we're going to go with. But you can still stop by. What's going to happen is Andrew's going to be kind of doing his thing, and every now and then between the speakers, he might kind of connect and see how it's going with us. We might have like different speakers that are going to join us in the portfolio reviews. But right now we have Nick and Mitch and Diane Gibbs and Mina Khalili, who are the reviewers, and I'm going to be just like emceeing.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing, Nark, I know you wrote that, we're doing it on Zoom, but I guess it's being broadcast on YouTube Live.
Exactly. Yeah. And let me see if I can find the link for it. Or
I think you got it.
Faster than I do, can probably just put it. But it's going to be, did somebody put it already?
I think it's at cancelcon.com allows you.
Canceled Con. Okay,
yes.
Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, but it's, I think on the site, they already have like where the YouTube, I think you put it on, let me find it.
Oh,
I think you put it on the Twitter.
I went to Canceled. Oh, there it is.
Canceled, and he has it both ways, both spelled the same way, with one L or two, so it should take you to the same place. Okay. Yeah.
Good. Any students have questions for other students? I'd love to know. Go for it if you want. Everyone's so shy now. Come on. The show's over. This is the after party.
There was a question there that I was hoping he'd answer about hiring people that don't go to the university.
Oh, I know. Yeah, man. You know, he has such rich answers that I knew we couldn't get to everything, but that was tough.
Yeah, but that was a good question.
Yeah. Did somebody want to? Yes, go for it.
Okay, so my question is for the students. How do you go about like using Instagram as your portfolio, kind of like separating your own work Instagram and then your personal one? Like, how do you go about that?
Narek, you want to answer?
Yeah, I only have one. I used to have two. I used to have a personal and one for design, but I combined the two because I feel like when people are hiring you, this is what I understand is they're hiring you as a person, both as a designer and as an individual. So you can combine it, and it's okay if your personal posts are there too, because that's what I like about designers is when I see their lives and their families, but I also like seeing their designs. So if you're comfortable with that, you can combine the two. But if you're not, then for a design Instagram, I just recommend it, like posting a lot, posting everything, posting your process, posting what you're passionate about, and using stories, using DMing people. It's all very it's all very effective.
Thank you.
How's everybody's portfolio coming along? Are you guys feeling pretty strong there?
Gotta put it together.
I would direct a question to my buddy Michael, who's here with us. Mike, you have been out of school for how many years now?
Oh man, I've been out for three years.
Great. And Mike's got some good insight as far as if you have questions on things like what's the first year like out of school, what kind of things he'd go back and do. Feel free to, I'd open up some questions to Mike. He's a great resource.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, what's funny though is there was a question just before about separating your portfolios, and I think I actually one of the people on this call is Mitch Goldstein, and he was one of my professors, and he gave me some great advice that was to not be afraid to conclude work that is necessarily what you consider like a design project. So if you consider, doing work that's
He's calling you out right now, dude.
No, I'm just kidding. Mike was an amazing student. Mike was really good. I had to just.
No, but he said like he's giving me advice.
He was amazing.
Not be afraid to put like your creative writing or your sketches. So in mine, I did I was designing clothing. I didn't want to go to school for clothing, or I didn't want to get hired for clothing design, but I wanted to show that I was able to think three-dimensionally. I was able to just do something more fun and creative, as opposed to I work as a UX designer. I had 3 UX projects in my portfolio, but then at the end I was like, hey, just here's some paintings and here's some sketches, and I love drawing buildings, and here's a couple of them. So it helped me.
That's good stuff. Yeah, I like that.
I have a question for everyone.
Go for it.
Any designer. So I know we've kind of been talking about this process now that we're kind of seeing a lot of portfolios and seeing people's different work. Would any of you guys suggest that it's good to have a brand to yourself, or would you say it's okay to have different kind of projects in a variety instead of having like a style?
I feel like personal style eventually comes along, but you still have to work at it. Like, it's not something you, in the beginning, you're like, okay, this will be my style, but it's more like the more work you do, the more your style will start to come out. So I don't know if that's
I don't know. I'd go to Mitch or Howard. I'd love to hear your guys' perspective on that, because
I've got a really specific opinion about that, which is probably going to irritate a bunch of you, but I think personal branding is complete and total bullshit. I think it is absurd that we do that in school. I think it's ridiculous. Faculty make students do it. You are not a brand. You are a human fucking being, okay? So please do not waste your time on a personal brand. I just think it's absurd. No offense to anybody who does it. I'm sure you're amazing, but I think it's ridiculous. Having said that, I have been wrong about many, many things in my life. So don't forget that.
In a really beautiful font, typeset it.
Yeah.
Make sure it looks great and it's kerned well.
Yep, boom, done. Yeah. Your personal brand should take you 30 seconds.
If I can chime in real quick, I've actually talked to people who have told me that when they look at people's portfolios, students' portfolios to hire designers, if they have some sort of, and I share this with my students, many of them are here, if they have some sort of personal logo, they'll just skip over that portfolio. Because a lot of times what they're like, all my favorite designers, all the ones I look up to, don't have their own personal logo. They just kind of like, they're almost invisible to whatever it is that they're creating. So they're more adaptable to whatever it is that the challenge is, as opposed to like, here's my brand and here's like what I inject. And there's designers that are successful on both sides of that belief, but I do know more often than not, I get people telling me that if they want, like Mitch was just saying, they prefer a designer to be a little more kind of like invisible to whatever they're doing, and adaptable, I guess is a better word, not invisible.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a couple of things. Well, one specific thing that I actually wanted to mention to Michael, but because it involved one of the original partners of Pentagram, Alan Fletcher, who was a noted painter as well as a designer. But one thing that he said really stuck out, the difference between a fine artist and a designer. A fine artist deals with their own issues, and a graphic designer deals with somebody else's issue.
Yeah.
And we have typography available to us as well. But going back to the issue of a personal brand, I think it's very premature, and I think the smartest way to brand yourself is that the effect of a brand should not be like the bumper on a car. It should not be the front edge. You eventually have a sense about what your voice is, about the particular voice that you have put together as a result of all these experiences you've gone through as a creative individual. So that brand, I think, is something that I wouldn't lead with it, but I would take note of what makes you over time.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us could say, you could spot what a particular student, a personal brand looks like from a mile away, right? And it's like, I think confidence in what we were saying earlier, in just building something clean, simple, and let the work speak for itself, let you speak for yourself. You're right, Mitch. They're hiring you as a human, not your portfolio, not your brand, not your Instagram. So it's kind of like, the more confident and clean and under all the principles of design, your word mark or your logo is, let it be that. Do the rest, do the work, let the work be what they remember, you know?
Right. And at the end of the day, I mean, you may have a portfolio that has like maybe 15 really dynamic pieces, but at the end of the day, literally, if there is something about your portfolio that is really embraceable, it's going to be 1, 2, or 3 pieces tops.
Yes.
And if the creative director can walk away thinking, I really like the job they did on that, fill in the blank, there you are. Okay. So that's the reality of it. Yeah. Find a creative director who'll give you an hour's worth of time.
Hey, now you can. We just got the number one guy for almost 2 hours.
I know. That's a great coup, dude. Really cool.
Yeah.
Hey, students, guys, I am so excited for you that you've had this opportunity to really kind of, bask in the glow of this experience. And, he's a storyteller. And guess what? So are you.
That's exactly it. Yeah. Any other questions? What else what's keeping you up other than this craziness? Go ahead.
I have a question about having a theme on your Instagram. So you know how it's going around where all these designers have their little theme. When you go through the Instagram, you can feel it. So it's not like whatever you find, you post it. So does that also fall under the branding thing? Should I stray away from that? Should I just post whatever I'm designing? I don't know.
Mitch, you look like you have an answer.
I mean, I think it's such a tough question. I mean, I think normally I would say don't worry about it, but we're in a kind of reality right now where I'm worried about like literally every possible thing that could possibly exist like in my life. So I don't want to sort of belittle it by saying that, but I think you just got to kind of do you. And I think the issue with social media as an entity is that there is zero friction between you and literally every other human being on social media. There is no gap. There is zero gap. You're rubbing up against each other. And I think it's really easy to just sort of see what other people are doing and say, holy shit, well, they did that and they have a job, I better do that. And I think that's kind of very toxic and very dangerous. I always tell my students, like, I don't want you to be like anybody but you. Like, that's the whole point of an education, is to sort of learn how to be you. And so that's all I would say. I mean, I don't have any really good advice on that regard, but I would just do whatever you feel is good. And if it's a big sort of organized thing, that's great. And if it's just kind of chaotic, I think that's great. I think that being honest with who you are and being authentic is more important than anything else.
It also depends on what you're asking for, or what your hopes are, right? Like, so I think someone who has a personal brand and it's showing up on their Instagram feed and there's a look and a feel is probably self-employed, has a business, sells merch, sells prints, right? Like they're doing it as a brand, even though it's the artist name or whoever. I think like Lauren Hom is the perfect example, right? She's killing it at everything she does, and this is her gig. And I'll look at my feed and be like, man, I have no consistency. I'm all over the place. But what I love about that is that's the variety I want to bring to any potential client, is we can go from fun, whimsical to serious and corporate and everything in between, because we can build a brand, we can tell a story. I don't feel like I have a talent that's going to make something that people would buy a line of or a merch. That's just not who I am, you know? So it's who you are and who are you trying to be? You know, if you're a student trying to get a job, I mean, make yourself as variety packed as possible. That's how I look at it, you know?
That's not true, Nick. I'm actually going to go buy some beer. That's your design merch. I'm buying that this weekend. So,
all right, good. Well, independently, yeah, I'd rather do that for the client. That's what they're paying me to do for them. But how many of you like let's say you were challenged to make that logo for yourself? That's the hardest logo to make. I can make it for anybody but myself. So again, I'd rather do it for the other folks and let them pay me for it than me try to, you know, make my own brand. No one will come in line. What else we got? Oh, it looks like it's dinner time for a bunch of you. Yep. Bye, guys.
Thanks,
Glad you
Nick.
made it. Glad you made it. For sure.
Thank you, guys.
All right. I'll have this
Thank
online.
you.
I'm going to have this online soon. As soon as I process it and get everything, we'll have it on YouTube so you guys can rewatch it, share it, do whatever. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nick, for including us. I appreciate it.
Oh gosh, you guys made it happen. This is great.
Thank you. We'll see you guys tomorrow.
Yeah. Tune in.
All right. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Yeah. Bye, Nick.
See you guys.